In this video, I'll share how you can create an Azure Cosmos DB in the Azure Portal. I'm within a new Azure resource group. I'll go to Create a new resource. Within the Marketplace, I'll search Cosmos DB. I'll find Azure Cosmos DB, and I'll choose to select the basic service. I now have the option to select the API that I'll use to access my resources within Azure Cosmos DB. The default is using Azure Cosmos DB for NoSQL, where I can use a SQL query language in order to access resources on the Cosmos DB database. You could also use MongoDB. And so if you use Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB, you would use queries that are similar to MongoDB for this version of Azure Cosmos DB. There are others as well. You can select others and see that you can have Azure Cosmos DB that acts like Azure Table Storage, or Azure Cosmos DB, which uses Apache Gremlin, Apache Cassandra, or even PostgreSQL. I'll choose to use the Azure Cosmos DB for NoSQL because this is the standard option. Now, looking at the basic features, my workload type will determine the expense and the way in which my Azure Cosmos DB functions. I'll choose Learning because this is the lowest cost and the quickest to get set up and for demo purposes. You'll want more capabilities if you're using a production workload. In those circumstances, you might choose one of the next two tiers up. I have my subscription, my resource group. I'll make an instance name, Cosmos DB, AIS for Azure Innovation Station, demo, create Cosmos DB. Availability zones allow me to replicate data across availability zones. Not all regions have Azure availability zones, and this documentation allows you to see which services do and do not. I'll leave a link to this in the description. I'll choose to not have Azure availability zones because it's unnecessary for this demo. The location for my Cosmos DB database, I'll make East US 2. Now there's a couple different versions I can use for the capacity mode for Azure Cosmos DB. I can pay on an hourly basis with provisioned throughput units. This makes my billing more predictable on a regular basis. There's also the option to have one Cosmos DB that uses a free tier per subscription that will allow you to save $64 per month on that Azure Cosmos DB account. The other option for capacity mode is serverless, where only the traffic that comes in and out is what's considered when it comes to being billed. You can also limit the account throughput that occurs in your Cosmos DB database to prevent being overbilled in circumstances where there's a ton of usage to your Cosmos DB database. This is a setting that can get changed after creation, so there's no harm in getting started with it now. In global distribution, you select geo redundancy if you want Cosmos DB to be able to back up to multiple regions at once. I can't do it right now because I don't have access to West Central US, which is the paired region for West US 2. I do have the option to select multi-writes, which allows me to write to multiple databases as well, instead of having one master instance that gets written to while others get replicated and then read from. Going to networking, I have the option to have my Cosmos DB database be accessible from all networks using a public endpoint or private endpoint. Next is backup policy. This will allow you to protect your data by backing it up either on a periodic basis or continually backing it up for the next 7 days, so you always have the ability to restore at any point over the last 7 days. Even safer is the continuous backup for 30 days. But keep in mind, this will increase costs for your Azure Cosmos DB instance. For security, I can have key-based authentication, which allows me to use account keys to access my Azure Cosmos DB. I'll leave this enabled. And the data encryption allows Microsoft to manage the keys that encrypt all the data, or you could choose to have customer managed keys, which makes you responsible for the keys that encrypt the data. I'll leave service managed keys. Next is tags if you want to organize your resources, and then review and create. My validation is successful, and I'll create my Azure Cosmos DB. My resource is done being created, and I'll go to Resource. Within my Azure Cosmos DB instance, I can go over to Data Explorer. I get a video if I want to start learning about Cosmos DB. I'll hit Next, Next, and I can start creating a new database and a container with a partition key and start using Azure Cosmos DB today. And that's how you create an Azure Cosmos DB instance in the Azure Portal.
If this video was helpful for you, I'd appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.